The sound of metal clinking against the tabletop rang out sharply. Coins rolled haphazardly across the crowded diner, colliding with each other in a mocking jingle. A few patrons looked up, their forks and knives pausing mid-air. I stood there, coffee tray still in hand, the familiar scent of honey pancakes suddenly turning stifling. "Here," Liam Bennett, my adoptive brother, drawled, his voice slow and syrupy. "This tip matches your level, Maddox." He flashed a smile, the kind of grin that belonged to someone who just asserted their power with a handful of cheap coins. I looked down at the table where the morning light glinted off the scattered silver coins. My face burned, the eyes around me turned in my direction, curious, pitying, some even contemptuous. In the corner of the diner, my adoptive father, Cliff Bennett, sat ramrod straight, his gaze cold as steel. My adoptive mother, Marilyn, let out a soft laugh, a sound as sharp as shattering glass. "Don't think these antics will get you a share of your grandfather's estate," Cliff said, his voice firm, cutting through the hushed room. "You're just an adopted son, after all. You have no claim here." Marilyn chimed in, her tone gentle but venomous. "Exactly. No matter how hard you try to prove yourself, it's pointless. This family doesn't need outsiders." I said nothing, bending down to pick up the coins one by one, my hands trembling slightly. Each clink of the coins felt like a blade slicing into my pride. "Thank you," I murmured softly, slipping the coins into my apron pocket before turning away. Behind the kitchen counter, my grandfather, Arthur Bennett, stood silently. He had seen everything. His aged eyes shimmered with a mix of disappointment and sorrow. But he said nothing. He only placed a hand on my shoulder as I passed by, a light, warm, trembling touch, as if to say he understood. If someone asked me what happened, I'd say, "Listen, and I'll tell you from the beginning." Just a few minutes earlier, everything had been normal. The diner was packed, filled with the sounds of customers ordering, children laughing, and my grandfather's voice calling out from the kitchen, "Maddox, another plate of fried eggs for table 4. I darted back and forth, sweat beading on my forehead, my worn green apron tied tightly around my waist. I liked this rhythm, busy but warm. Then the door chimed and I looked up. My heart skipped a beat. My adoptive father, Cliff Bennett, walked in, followed by my adoptive mother, Marilyn, and my adoptive brother, Liam. They were dressed impeccably, as if they'd just stepped out of a meeting in Portland. Cliff wore an expensive gray suit, his polished shoes reflecting the diner's lights. Marilyn was draped in a fur coat, her blonde hair meticulously styled, her red lips pursed tightly. Liam, my younger brother, sported a white dress shirt and slacks, hands in his pockets, striding with unshakable confidence. The three of them exuded an air of detachment, as if they didn't belong in this small town in my grandfather's old-fashioned diner. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "Hello. Welcome," I said, my voice slightly off. "Please, there's a table over there." I gestured toward a table by the window where the early morning light spilled across the wooden chairs. They didn't respond, only nodded slightly, then brushed past me as if I were a stranger, not someone who had grown up in their home. I placed the menus on the table, my hands trembling slightly. "What would you like today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Liam picked up a menu, scanned it, and smirked. "Wow, still the same old stuff? Honey pancakes, fried eggs, sausages? I thought Grandpa's diner would have something new by now." His tone was sharp, each word like a small dagger. I bit my lip, scribbling quickly in my notepad, staying silent. Cliff sat upright, his eyes scanning the diner as if appraising a piece of merchandise. "Still waiting tables here, Maddox?" he asked, his voice icy. "I thought you'd have found something better by now." The word better hit like a slap. I felt the curious glances of nearby patrons. I only nodded slightly. "Yes, I like this job." Marilyn, seated beside Cliff, let out a soft laugh, sharp as broken glass. "Like it? You've been here so long, you must be planning to stick around for the inheritance, hmm?" She tilted her head, her green eyes sweeping over me, dripping with mockery. "But Maddox, this place isn't worth waiting for." Her words were like a cold gust of wind, freezing me in place. I wanted to say something, to push back, but my throat tightened. I just lowered my head, finishing their order. A few minutes later, I returned to their table with a tray of food, their demeanor still unnervingly calm. I set the plates down, forcing a smile, but Liam's eyes told me something bad was coming. Then Liam pulled out his wallet. He placed a few bills on the table, an act that seemed polite at first. I was briefly surprised, but then he paused, a malicious glint in his eyes. "Hold on," Liam said softly, pulling the bills back. He reached into his jacket pocket, fished out a handful of coins, and jingled them lightly in his palm. In that moment, I knew what was coming. I wished I'd turned away, but it was too late, because just a few seconds later, that jingle rang out. And nothing in that familiar diner would ever be the same. And that was the moment you saw at the start of the story, where a few scattered coins changed everything. That morning, after Cliff and his family left, the diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The clatter of cutlery resumed, and laughter and conversation filled the air once more. But inside me, something had shattered. I worked like a machine, pouring coffee, wiping tables, smiling at regular customers. I stayed late, as usual, cleaning the kitchen counter, stacking chairs, and checking the books. Grandpa had gone home early, leaving me with the quiet stillness of the diner. I sat down on the wooden chair by the window where I used to sit for hours as a child, listening to Grandma Eleanor tell stories about the early days of Bennett's Diner. The room was now silent, but the memories were not. I looked outside where Cedar Ridge's main street lay shrouded in darkness with only a few flickering streetlights. And then, like a flood, memories surged back, pulling me into the years that shaped who I am today. 2 years ago, I wasn't Maddox Bennett, the waiter at Bennett's Diner. I was Maddox, 24 years old, a marketing assistant for a large food company in Portland, Oregon. I had a small rented apartment, a steady job with a salary that afforded a comfortable life, and a future that seemed to be unfolding before me. Every day I wore crisp dress shirts, sat in an office, attended meetings, made plans, and dreamed of the days I'd climb the corporate ladder, building a life of my own. But everything changed with a single phone call. That night I was sitting on the sofa in my apartment, laptop open on the table, preparing to send an email to my boss when my phone rang. It was Grandpa Arthur. His voice over the phone was hoarse, weaker than before, but still carried that familiar warmth. "Still working at this hour?" he asked. I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. "Yeah, just a few more reports. What about you, still up?" He was quiet for a moment, then replied softly, "Yeah, the diner was packed today. The coffee machine broke again, so I had to manage until evening." I paused. Since Grandma passed, he'd been stubbornly handling everything on his own, never complaining. "I'm getting old, Maddox," he said after another silence. "I don't have the strength to open the place every morning anymore." I was about to say something, ask if he needed to hire help, but he continued slowly, each word carrying a quiet loneliness. "I just need someone by my side." Those words kept me awake all night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought of Grandpa, the diner, and the days when I was a kid running around the kitchen, learning from Grandma Eleanor how to roll dough for pancakes. I remembered Grandpa pulling me into his arms, telling stories about how he and Grandma started the diner from nothing. And I remembered the years in Cliff and Marilyn's house, where I never felt I belonged. My biological parents died when I was 6. A car accident took them, leaving me with a void I still can't fill. Cliff, my father's best friend, took me in. He said it was his duty, a promise to my father. But in that house, I was never their son. Cliff Bennett, 58, was the chief accountant for a large real estate firm. Practical and calculating, he cared only about money and reputation. Marilyn Bennett, 55, worked as an administrative assistant in the same industry, always appearing polished with a perfect smile in public. But at home, she called me that boy, as if I were a temporary guest, not someone who'd lived under their roof for 20 years. Liam, my adoptive younger brother, 4 years my junior, was their pride and joy. Spoiled from a young age, he grew up with expensive clothes, lavish vacations, and a sales position in his father's company. From the time I was 10, Liam started calling me the stray or not a real Bennett. At first it was just childish teasing, but over time those words became sharp blades cutting into me daily. I remember dinners where the three of them laughed and talked about their plans and successes, while I sat silently at the edge of the table eating cold cuts, feeling like a shadow. But I never resented them. I learned to stay quiet, to accept that I didn't belong there. And that night, Grandpa's words, "I just need someone by my side," were a reminder of a promise I'd made to myself. I vowed never to let Grandpa and Grandma feel the loneliness I'd felt in Cliff's house. The next morning, I submitted my resignation. My colleagues looked at me like I was crazy. "You're quitting a good job to go be a waiter?" they asked. I just smiled, packed my things, and drove back to Cedar Ridge. Stepping back into Bennett's diner, the smell of honey and coffee was exactly as I remembered. Grandpa hugged me, his frail but warm arms wrapping around me. "Thank you, Maddox," he said, his eyes sparkling with joy. From then on, I worked at the diner from early morning to late at night, not for money or status, but for him, the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. But that morning I realized the past never lets go. Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam still saw me as a leech, someone unworthy of the Bennett name. They didn't know, and probably never would understand, that I wasn't here to compete or claim anything. I was here to preserve a promise, a legacy, and a piece of my heart. I stood silently in the now empty diner, the dim yellow light casting a soft glow on the old photos hanging on the walls. In one picture, Grandpa Arthur and Grandma Eleanor stood in front of Bennett's diner, hand in hand, their smiles radiant like a summer sun. I looked at them and childhood memories flooded back like an old book opening to its yellowed pages. In the darkest years of my life, they were my only light, the place where I found solace when the world turned its back on me. Those memories took me back to my childhood days, when all my sorrows melted away at the sound of a familiar engine rumbling outside the gate. Every weekend when Grandpa Arthur pulled up in his old pickup truck to get me, it was like I came alive again. "Hop in, Maddox," he'd call, his voice as warm as a hearth on a winter's day. I'd scramble into the front seat, my heart light, knowing I was heading to the place where I truly belonged. Bennett's Diner in the 80s and 90s wasn't just a small eatery in Cedar Ridge. It was once a famous chain across Oregon. Grandpa, now in his 70s, was the one who started it all. But he wasn't the type to boast. He'd tell me in his low, proud voice how he used to be a poor delivery boy, pedaling his bike through dusty roads to deliver vegetables. Grandma Eleanor, then a waitress in a small diner, stole his heart with her gentle smile and star-bright eyes. They met in tough times when both had only a few coins in their pockets and dreams bigger than the sky. I once heard Grandma Eleanor say as we worked side by side in the kitchen, her hands deftly mixing batter, her voice soft as a breeze. "We opened this diner, Maddox, not just to sell food, but to bring people together like a family." I was too young then to fully grasp her words. I only saw the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of the diner, as if it held her youth and their love. With the little money they saved, they built Bennett's Diner from nothing. In the early years, Grandpa worked the kitchen, Grandma waited tables, and they laughed through the lean days. Their love and faith in honest work turned that dream into reality. When the chain grew with dozens of locations across Oregon, they remained humble. They never bought a big house or a fancy car. "The customers are family, Maddox," Grandma Eleanor would say, ruffling my hair. "A meal is how we share love." Grandma was the soul of Bennett's Diner, the one who created the honey pancake recipe that still makes regulars swoon. She tended to every customer, remembering their names, asking about their kids, as if everyone who walked through the door was kin. Through it all, they had each other, and that made me feel safe. In their eyes, I wasn't the adopted kid or the stray. I was Maddox, their grandson, loved unconditionally. But then when I was 12, my world collapsed. Grandma Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer. She wasted away quickly, her once golden hair falling out. I remember those final days when she lay in her hospital bed, still smiling at me. "Promise me, Maddox," she said, gripping my hand, her voice frail. "Keep this diner. Keep what we built. It's not just a diner. It's love." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, though I didn't yet fully understand the weight of that promise. She passed away on a spring morning, leaving a void in my heart and Grandpa's that nothing could fill. After her death, Grandpa Arthur was never the same. He sold off the entire chain, keeping only the original Cedar Ridge location, the one where they started. "This is Eleanor's soul," he told me. From then on, he lived simply, spending his days at the diner, working, chatting with regulars, and looking after me. The grandson, he said, made him feel like Eleanor was still there. Those memories, like a small flame, kept me grounded through the years of rejection from Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam. In their eyes, I was always an outsider. But Grandpa never let me feel that way. He taught me to stand tall, to smile through the pain. "You're a Bennett," he'd say firmly. "Not by blood, but by heart." Those words, along with memories of Grandma Eleanor, became my foundation. When I left my job in Portland to return to Cedar Ridge, it wasn't just for Grandpa. I came back to keep my promise to Grandma, to protect their legacy, and to prove I wasn't the stray Liam called me. But in the months that followed, that flame was tested fiercely. It all began when Grandpa Arthur's health started to decline. One winter afternoon, as I was wiping down the counter, I heard a dry cough from the kitchen. I rushed in and found him slumped over, clutching his chest, his face pale. I'm fine," he gasped, but I knew something was wrong. I called an ambulance, my heart pounding as I watched him being taken to the hospital. The doctors said it was a mild heart attack. "He needs rest," they told me sternly. "No heavy work, no stress. If not, the next one could be worse." But Grandpa was Arthur Bennett, the man who built an empire from nothing. He didn't know the meaning of rest. Every morning, despite my pleas for him to stay home, he insisted on going to the diner, wearing his old cap, walking slowly but with determination. "This diner is my life, Maddox," he said. "I can't abandon it." I looked at him, my heart aching, but I could only nod. I started taking on more, cooking, checking the books, so he could sit behind the counter, chatting with regulars instead of hauling heavy crates. Word of Grandpa's health soon reached Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam. One day, as I was carrying a tray of coffee to a table, the diner's door chimed. They walked in, dressed as impeccably as ever, but this time with fake smiles. Marilyn led the way, hugging Grandpa, her voice syrupy. "Dad, we're so worried about you. You can't keep working like this." Cliff nodded, patting Grandpa's shoulder. "She's right, Dad. You need to rest, enjoy your old age." Liam stood behind them, quieter, but his eyes were cold and calculating. I knew they weren't sincere. Their visits to the diner became more frequent, each one accompanied by advice that sounded rehearsed. "You should sell the diner, Dad," Cliff said one day while Grandpa was reviewing invoices. "Now's a good time. Real estate prices are high. You'd get a good sum to live comfortably." Marilyn chimed in, her voice gentle but calculating. "Exactly, Dad. Someone your age shouldn't be working so hard. Let us take care of you." I stood behind the counter, gripping the rag tightly, my blood boiling. They weren't worried about him. They were worried about their wallets. Grandpa just shook his head, his voice firm. "This diner isn't for sale. It's my life with Eleanor." He looked at them, his eyes blazing like fire. "You don't understand. It's not just a diner. It's love, it's family." Cliff pursed his lips, his eyes darkening. Marilyn gave a forced smile while Liam shrugged, muttering, "Why keep this old place? It's not worth much." I couldn't stay silent anymore. "This diner is worth more than anything you could imagine," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "It's Grandpa and Grandma's legacy, built with their sweat and heart. You have no right to demand it be sold." Cliff turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you to speak, Maddox? You're just the adopted kid leeching off my father's affection for your own gain, aren't you?" Marilyn cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. "Exactly. This is grown-up business. Stay out of it. Their words cut like knives, but this time I didn't bow my head. I'm here for Grandpa, for the promise I made to Grandma Eleanor. What are you here for? The air in the diner grew heavy. A few customers glanced over, whispering. Liam stepped forward, pointing at my face. Don't act noble. Keeping this diner is pointless. Sell it, split the money, and everyone benefits. I wanted to yell back, but Grandpa's gaze stopped me. He stood up, slow but commanding. Enough, he said. Get out. But they didn't stop. A week later, I was helping Grandpa with the books at his house when the doorbell rang. Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam walked in, accompanied by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. This is our lawyer, Cliff announced, his voice cold. Dad, we think it's time you made a new will. Leave your assets to your real family, before it's too late. Marilyn nodded, her eyes sliding over me as if I were invisible. We just want what's best for you, Dad. I felt the blood rush to my head. Grandpa stood up, his hands trembling but his voice like thunder. Real family? You dare say that? All you want is money to destroy what Eleanor and I built. He pointed to the door. Get out. Now, Cliff opened his mouth to argue, but Grandpa's glare silenced him. They left, not without throwing me looks of pure venom. From that day, Grandpa cut off contact with Cliff. He called me to his side, his voice low but clear. Maddox, you help me run the diner, handle the books. You're the only one I trust. I nodded, my heart heavy. Though his health was frail, his mind was sharp. In his eyes, I saw a plan forming. A plan to protect his and Grandma's legacy from the very people who bore the Bennett name. I knew this battle wasn't over. Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam wouldn't give up easily. But neither would I. I'd stand by Grandpa to the end. In the months that followed, I lived as if walking a tightrope. Every morning I watched Grandpa shuffle into the diner, his old cap hiding his snow-white hair, his trembling hands still trying to hold a coffee cup. He didn't say much, but his eyes burned with determination, as if he were preparing for a final battle. I worked tirelessly, hoping to give him some rest. But every time the door chimed, my heart skipped a beat, fearing it was Cliff, Marilyn, or Liam coming to torment him with their venomous words. Grandpa had seen through his son and daughter-in-law's true intentions. They only want money, Maddox, he told me one evening as we sat in the small room behind the diner, surrounded by Grandma Eleanor's keepsakes. If I don't act, your grandmother's legacy will vanish. His voice dropped, each word like a knife cutting into his heart. I swallowed hard and asked, "What are you going to do?" He looked at me, his gaze as sharp as it was in his youth when he built Bennett's diner from nothing. "I'll make a new will. This time, no one can dispute it." He had contacted Helen Crawford, a seasoned lawyer in Cedar Ridge and Grandma Eleanor's old friend. Helen came to the diner one stormy afternoon carrying a camera and a thick stack of documents. I stood outside, my heart pounding as Grandpa sat before the camera, reading each clause. His voice rang out steady and unwavering like a final proclamation. I didn't hear everything, but I knew he was pouring his heart into it. A week later, Grandpa summoned the family to his small wooden house at the end of Cedar Ridge's main street. I stepped into the living room, the air heavy as before a storm. Cliff sat on the sofa, arms crossed, his expensive gray suit unable to mask the tension on his face. Marilyn was beside him, her blonde hair perfectly styled, but her red lips pursed tightly, her cold eyes gliding over me as if I were a stranger. Liam sat off to one side, scrolling on his phone, but I noticed his fingers trembling slightly as if trying to hide his anxiety. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, Helen Crawford standing beside him, holding a stack of documents. I stood behind him, trying to stay calm, though my heart churned like a stormy sea. "I called you here to talk about my will," Grandpa began, his voice resonating in the silent room. "I don't have much time left, and I want everything to be clear before I go." Cliff raised an eyebrow, his eyes glinting as if he could smell money. Marilyn tilted her head, a forced smile playing on her lips. Liam stopped scrolling, sitting up straight, his eyes gleaming with ambition. I clenched my fists, feeling the air thicken around us. Grandpa continued, his voice like thunder. All my assets, the diner, investment shares, the savings of over 30 years worth millions of dollars, will be transferred to Maddox after I pass. The room seemed to explode. Cliff shot to his feet, his chair crashing behind him, his face flushed, veins bulging on his forehead. "What did you say?" he roared, his voice trembling with rage. "Maddox! That adopted kid? Have you lost your mind?" Marilyn clutched her husband's arm, her nails digging into his skin, but she couldn't hold back either. "Dad, he's manipulated you," she screamed, pointing at me, her eyes blazing. "He took advantage of your weakness, tricking you to steal our family's fortune." Liam leapt from his seat, throwing his phone onto the sofa, his face contorted with fury. "I knew it," he yelled, jabbing a finger at me. "He's been here, sucking up to Grandpa, acting all noble just to take everything. He's not a Bennett. He's a stray." Each of Liam's words was like a knife, but I stood still, clenching my jaw, looking at Grandpa. He didn't waver. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice so powerful it silenced all three of them. "Be quiet," he shouted. "Maddox is the only one who truly loves me, who values this family's legacy. He understands what Bennett's Diner means, something you've never and will never comprehend. All you see is money, profit. But this legacy is about love, about human values. My decision is made, and it's final." Cliff staggered back, his face pale, but his eyes burned with hatred toward me. Marilyn covered her face, tears streaming down, but I knew they weren't from sorrow. They were from suppressed rage. Liam muttered something, his voice dripping with venom, before all three turned and left, the door slamming behind them. The room fell silent again, filled only with Grandpa's heavy breathing and Helen Crawford's resolute gaze. But they didn't stop. Just days later, Cliff filed a lawsuit against his own father, accusing Grandpa of being mentally incompetent and claiming I had coerced and manipulated him into making the will. The lawsuit swept through Cedar Ridge like a hurricane. The small town, where everyone knew each other, split into two camps. Some criticized Cliff, calling him a disloyal son, whispering in grocery stores, "How dare he sue his own father for money?" But others cast suspicious glances at me. "Maddox must have a scheme," they murmured behind my back as I passed. "He's just an adopted kid. Why would Arthur choose him?" Every day at work I felt their scrutinizing stares, like needles pricking my skin. But I didn't care. My only concern was Grandpa, who still came to the diner every morning, though his legs trembled and his breath grew weaker. The trial took place on a rainy day in the town's small courtroom. I sat beside Grandpa, his cold but steady hand gripping mine. Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam sat across from us, their eyes like daggers. Cliff wore a black suit, but his polished appearance couldn't hide his tension. He kept wiping sweat from his forehead. Marilyn sat upright, her red lips tightly pursed, but her hands trembled as she smoothed her hair. Liam, usually arrogant, now hung his head, his eyes avoiding contact, as if he knew he was doing something wrong. Helen Crawford stepped forward, calm and confident. She presented medical reports proving Grandpa was fully lucid. Then she requested the will's video be played. The room fell silent as Grandpa's image appeared on the screen. He sat at a table, his eyes blazing, his voice resounding like thunder. "A legacy isn't about money, it's about human values," he said, staring into the camera. "Of all my children, only one remembers that. Maddox." When the video ended, I heard a faint sob from Marilyn, but it wasn't from emotion, it was defeat. Cliff bowed his head, his hands gripping the chair tightly. Liam turned away, his lips pressed shut. The judge's gavel struck, declaring the will legal and dismissing all accusations. The sound of the gavel was like a final cut. Cliff stood, pulling Marilyn and Liam out of the room without looking back. Their reputation in Cedar Ridge was shattered, but in my heart, there was no joy in victory. I looked at Grandpa, saw his faint smile, and knew this battle had taken too much from him. I squeezed his hand, silently vowing to protect this legacy no matter the cost. In the months following the trial, Grandpa's health deteriorated rapidly, like a candle burning down to its last wax. He no longer had the strength to work in the kitchen or chat with regulars. Each morning I helped him from the small room behind the diner to the wooden chair by the window, where he liked to sit and watch people pass by on Cedar Ridge's main street. He held a coffee cup, his hands trembling, his gaze distant as if searching for Grandma Eleanor's shadow in the early morning light. I stood beside him, my heart aching, hiding my tears whenever he coughed or gasped for breath. "Maddox," he said, his voice weak but still warm. "You're my pride. Don't let them sway you." I cared for him day and night, cooking porridge, reminding him to take his medicine, sitting by his bedside, reading old stories about Bennett's Diner. But I knew time waited for no one, not even the man who'd spent his life building a legacy out of love. One early autumn morning, when golden leaves blanketed the yard, I walked into his room as usual, carrying a tray of hot porridge. The silence was deafening. He lay there on the old wooden bed, his eyes closed, his face serene as if lost in a beautiful dream. Beside him on a small table was the old photo of Grandma Eleanor, her smile radiant as sunlight. Next to it was a sealed envelope scrawled with his shaky handwriting, "For Maddox." I knelt by the bed, grasping his cold hand. Tears fell, but I didn't sob. I knew he was gone, reunited with Grandma Eleanor where he always belonged. The funeral was simple, just as he wanted. I handled everything, from choosing the coffin to inviting the diner's regulars. The people of Cedar Ridge filled the cemetery, standing silently, their eyes red. But Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam appeared like ghosts. Cliff stood at a distance, his black suit unable to mask the bitterness on his face. Marilyn held a handkerchief to her mouth, but her eyes were cold, not a single tear shed. Liam, arms crossed, glared at me with undisguised envy, as if I'd stolen something that was rightfully his. They said nothing, offered no comfort, no condolences. They just stood there like strangers, and when the funeral ended, they left without a goodbye. After the funeral, Helen Crawford, the lawyer, announced the official will at her small office. I sat there, clutching the envelope Grandpa left me as Helen read each clause aloud. All of his assets, Bennett's Diner, the properties, investment shares, and savings accumulated over 30 years, now belonged to me. Worth millions of dollars, but to me, it wasn't about the money. It was a promise, a love, a legacy from my grandparents that I swore to protect. Cliff and Marilyn were invited but didn't show up. Instead, I received a short handwritten letter from Marilyn, her tone icy. "We'll manage our own lives. Don't contact us again." I read the letter, folded it, and tucked it into a drawer. My heart didn't ache, only felt empty. I was used to their distance, but this time it was final, like a door slamming shut, severing the last threads between us. Liam was different. He didn't cut contact immediately. I heard he opened a small bar in the next town over, funded by Cliff and Marilyn. But that bar, called Liam's Lounge, was merely a shadow of his resentment. He ran it with a heart full of envy, always comparing it to Bennett's Diner. Once I ran into him at the grocery store. "Congrats, Maddox," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're the big boss now. But don't forget, you're still just the adopted kid." I looked into his eyes, saw the venom, but I didn't respond. I turned away, leaving him to stew in his self-inflicted anger. From then on, my relationship with my adoptive family was completely severed. No more calls, no more awkward gatherings, no ties left to bind us. Cedar Ridge, once a place where I felt out of place, became my true home. I opened the envelope Grandpa left me, finding a short letter in his trembling handwriting. "Maddox, you're the keeper of Bennett's Diner's flame. Let it burn bright as your grandmother and I did. I'm proud of you." I read it over and over, tears streaming down, but my heart swelled with resolve. I wouldn't let them down. After the funeral, once the inheritance procedures were finalized, I officially became the owner of Bennett's Diner. Not just the small eatery in Cedar Ridge, but also the properties and investments Grandpa left behind. I stood in the diner looking at the worn wooden tables, the chairs where regulars had sat for 40 years, and I knew I had to start. The diner, neglected during Grandpa's declining years, had fallen into disrepair. The wooden walls were faded, the roof leaked in places, and the menu hadn't changed since Grandma Eleanor's time. I spent months renovating, sleeping no more than 4 hours a night. I repainted the walls, patched the roof, and replaced the cloudy glass windows with new sparkling ones. I hired a young chef from the next town over, but kept Grandma Eleanor's pancake recipe, the one regulars called the taste of memory. I cooked, served, cleaned, doing everything I could to restore the diner to its former glory. At first, customers were scarce. Some came out of curiosity, but others whispered, "Can that adopted kid actually do anything? He just inherited it." I heard them, but paid no mind. I smiled at every customer, asked about their lives as Grandma Eleanor once did, and personally poured coffee for the town's elderly. Slowly, the diner came back to life. Old customers returned, bringing their children and grandchildren. "Maddox, you remind me of Arthur," an elderly woman said, her eyes teary as she bit into a pancake. "You've got your grandparents' heart." Her words were like a breeze fanning the flame inside me. Bennett's Diner didn't revive because of good food alone. It came alive because of the warmth and authenticity, where everyone was treated like family. One morning, I saw a homeless man lingering outside the door. I invited him in, offering a plate of hot pancakes and a cup of coffee free of charge. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. From that day, I decided to set aside a portion of the diner's profits to help those in need. Each month, the diner hosted free breakfasts for seniors, and I started an apprenticeship program for local youth, teaching them to cook and serve, just as my grandparents had taught me. That sincerity spread. Customers came in droves, not just from Cedar Ridge, but from neighboring towns. The local paper began writing about the diner, calling it Cedar Ridge's gem. I stood behind the counter, watching the line of people, hearing the lively chatter and laughter, and felt my grandparents smiling somewhere. One day, I sat down and drafted plans for a second location in a nearby town. I named the new chain Bennett's Diner Community Table, with the motto, "People matter more than profit." It wasn't just words. Every new branch donated a portion of its revenue to the community, from aiding the poor to funding scholarships for underprivileged kids. The second branch opened, then a third, a fourth. Within 3 years, Bennett's Diner Community Table spread across Oregon, from small towns to big cities. The press praised my model as a diner chain that unites communities, where everyone was welcome, rich or poor. But for me, success wasn't the articles or the revenue numbers. Success was an elderly woman holding my hand, saying she felt like she was coming home every time she ate the pancakes. It was a boy in the apprenticeship program beaming with pride when he made his first pancake. Even as the chain grew, I never forgot the original diner in Cedar Ridge. Every week I returned, standing behind the counter, personally serving the regulars, those who knew my grandparents, who'd heard their love story. One afternoon, as I poured coffee for old Tom, a regular from Grandpa's days, he said, "Maddox, you've done what Arthur and Eleanor always dreamed of. You've kept their flame burning bright." I smiled, but my heart choked with emotion. I wasn't doing this for fame or money. I was doing it for them, for my promise, and for myself. Maddox Bennett, who found life's meaning in every plate of food. But not everything was peaceful. One day I heard that Liam, my adoptive brother, was struggling with his bar. Liam's lounge was losing money, drowning in debt. Part of me wanted to help, but another part remembered the coins he'd tossed on the table, the cruel words he'd spoken. I wondered if a day would come when they'd return, not to fight, but to ask for help. I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I would keep walking my path, preserving my grandparents' legacy and spreading the love they taught me. After 3 years, Bennett's Diner Community Table had become an icon in Oregon. From the small diner in Cedar Ridge, I expanded to dozens of locations, each carrying the spirit of my grandparents. People matter more than profit. The press called me the reviver of the Bennett legacy, but to me it was simply how I kept my promise to Grandpa Arthur and Grandma Eleanor. Meanwhile, the lives of Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam took a starkly different path. I heard from town acquaintances that Cliff, with his overconfident swagger, had poured money into risky real estate ventures. Everything collapsed when the market crashed. Their house, cars, even their savings were sold off to pay debts. Marilyn, once draped in fur coats with a perfect smile, now looked worn and haggard, her polished exterior gone. Liam's lounge fared even worse. The bar, opened with his parents' money, quickly failed. He couldn't pay rent, owed wages to employees, and faced lawsuits that forced him to shut it down. Whispers spread through town. The once proud Bennett family was now in ruins. One winter afternoon, as I stood behind the counter at Bennett's diner, the door chimed. I looked up and my heart seemed to stop. Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam walked in, no trace of their former elegance. Cliff wore an old coat, his face gaunt, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. Marilyn, her hair disheveled, tried to maintain composure, but her trembling hands clutched a worn purse. Liam, once smug with a mocking grin, kept his head down, avoiding my gaze. They stood there amidst the bustling diner like lost ghosts. The atmosphere in the diner grew heavy. Regulars glanced over, whispering. "That's the family that sued Arthur," one said. "What are they doing here?" I took a deep breath, stepped out from behind the counter, and kept my voice calm. "Hello," I said, gesturing to an empty table by the window. "Please, have a seat." Marilyn spoke first, her voice trembling, stripped of its former sharpness. "Maddox, we need to talk." Cliff stood behind her, arms crossed, but I saw him swallow hard, as if trying to suppress his pride. Liam remained silent, eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders slumped like a defeated man. I nodded, leading them to a quieter corner where the diner's noise wouldn't interrupt. In my heart, I knew this wasn't a casual visit. Marilyn began, her voice hesitant. "Maddox, we're in trouble. The bank is foreclosing on our house. We've lost almost everything." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and this time I saw no pretense. Cliff cut in, his voice hoarse. "I didn't want to come here, but we have no other choice." Liam finally looked up, his eyes filled with resentment. "You must be thrilled, huh?" he said bitterly. "You're the big boss now, and we're left with nothing." I wanted to retort, to remind them of what they'd done to me, to Grandpa. But I looked into Marilyn's eyes, saw her desperation, and remembered Grandma Eleanor's words. "Love is the way to heal all wounds." I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "Sit down," I said. "We'll talk." Their appearance sent Cedar Ridge abuzz. Rumors spread like wildfire. The Bennetts came to beg Maddox for help. Some smirked, recalling how they'd called me the Stray. But I paid no mind. I led them to a table, ordered 3 cups of coffee and a plate of pancakes. As I set the plate before them, Marilyn broke down, covering her face. Cliff bowed his head, gripping his coffee cup tightly. Liam stared out the window, lips pressed shut, as if wrestling with himself. That meeting wasn't just a conversation. It was a turning point, where my compassion and forgiveness faced their final test. I looked at them, the people who had once scorned me, who had sued Grandpa to seize his legacy, now sitting before me, vulnerable and desperate. In my heart, memories of years of rejection surged, but alongside them were images of Grandpa, Grandma Eleanor, and the promise I'd sworn to keep. I knew my decision would shape not only their future, but also the person I wanted to become. I sat across from Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam in a quiet corner of Bennett's diner. The diner buzzed with the laughter and chatter of customers, but in this corner the air was heavy as lead. Regulars whispered among themselves, their curious eyes following us. "They're here to beg Maddox," one muttered. "After everything they did?" I held no grudge. Instead, I chose to listen. I looked at them and said, "Tell me, what do you need?" Marilyn let out a sob, her voice trembling. "We need a chance, Maddox. Please help us." Cliff kept his head down for the first time in his life, no longer the arrogant man who pushed me to the margins of the family. Liam turned away, his shoulders shaking, caught between pride and desperation. I stayed silent, letting the heavy atmosphere settle. Then I spoke, my voice slow but firm. "I'll help. But there's a condition. You'll work with me to preserve Grandpa's legacy, Bennett's Diner. Cliff's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as if I'd insulted him. You want me to work for you? He growled, slamming his hand on the table, causing his coffee cup to tip and black liquid to spill across the wood. A foster kid telling me what to do. Marilyn grabbed his arm, pleading, Cliff, please, we have no choice. Liam jumped up, pointing at my face, his cheeks flushed. You think I'll bow down and work for you? No way. He turned to leave, but Marilyn pulled him back, sobbing, Liam, stop. We have nothing left. Liam froze, his eyes wavering between anger and pain, then slumped back into his seat, muttering, I don't have a choice. I looked at them, my heart torn between pain and hope. This isn't punishment, I said. This is a chance for you to understand the value of Bennett's Diner, of family. Cliff, you'll manage the inventory and oversee finances. Marilyn, you'll handle personnel and community initiatives. Liam, you'll run a new branch under my supervision. Cliff pursed his lips, his eyes still brimming with pride, but he nodded, his voice hoarse. Fine, I'll do it. Marilyn nodded too, tears streaming down her face. Liam only muttered, whatever you say. The early days were like walking on thin ice. Cliff worked in the inventory room, but every time I checked on him, he glared at me as if I were the enemy. One day, he snapped at an employee for misplacing stock, and I had to step in. Cliff, here we respect everyone, I said firmly. He fell silent, but I saw him begin to change slowly as he watched the kitchen staff sweat to serve customers. Marilyn, in her role with personnel, struggled at first to organize the free breakfast events. But one day I saw her hug an elderly woman, her eyes red as she listened to the woman's stories of hardship. I never understood this value, Marilyn whispered to me, her voice heavy with regret. Liam managing the new branch was initially careless, ignoring my instructions. Once customers complained about slow service and I had to step in. If you're not serious, I'll replace you, I said, looking him in the eye. He grumbled, but afterward I saw him wiping tables himself, sweat beading on his forehead. One evening he came to me, his voice hesitant. I was wrong, Maddox. I want to do better. It was the first time I saw Liam sincere. The humane environment of Bennett's Diner changed them. Cliff learned to value hard work, starting to chat with employees like friends. Marilyn, once cold, now organized community events with genuine dedication, as if she'd found new meaning. Liam, once an arrogant boy, learned responsibility, even making pancakes for customers himself. For me, forgiveness wasn't just letting go of the past. It was giving them a chance to reclaim the values they'd lost, transforming Bennett's Diner into a symbol of unity and compassion for the Bennett family. Years later, Bennett's Diner community table was no longer just a chain of diners. It was a blazing flame shining brightly across Oregon. From small towns to big cities, people knew us not only for our honey pancakes or fragrant coffee, but for the spirit of sharing and compassion each branch embodied. Food magazines hailed us as the community's diner chain, and local media called me the keeper of Oregon's soul. But to me, every article, every accolade was merely a reminder of the promise I made to Grandpa Arthur and Grandma Eleanor, to keep their flame burning forever. The Bennett family, once fractured by greed and resentment, slowly found peace. Our shared meals, once cold with awkward silence, were now filled with laughter. We sat around the wooden table in the original Cedar Ridge Diner, sharing stories about old customers. Like old Tom, who came every morning for his coffee, or Mrs. Mary, who always asked for extra honey because it reminds me of Eleanor. Cliff, Marilyn, and Liam were no longer distant shadows. They became part of the legacy, part of the real family I had always longed for. Cliff, after a mild heart attack last winter, no longer had the strength to manage inventory. He retired from work, but every morning I saw him push open the diner's door and settle into his familiar corner by the window. He ordered a black coffee, watching me run the diner with eyes no longer filled with bitterness, but with pride. "You've done well, Maddox," he said once, his voice hoarse, his trembling hand clutching the coffee cup. "I was wrong to think you didn't deserve this." His words, though simple, cut through years of pain. I only nodded, smiling, but my heart was overwhelmed. Marilyn, once cold and distant, became calm and gentle. She spent her days organizing Eleanor's Breakfast, a charity program named after Grandma, providing free meals for seniors and those in need. "Maddox," she said to me afterward, her voice trembling, "I never understood the value of these things. Until now." I held her hand, feeling a warmth I'd never known from her before. Marilyn had found new meaning, not in fur coats or perfect smiles, but in helping others. Liam, who once threw coins in my face, matured beyond what I ever imagined. He managed a branch in the next town, running it with a responsibility I never thought he possessed. One afternoon, I visited and saw him making pancakes for a group of kids in the apprenticeship program. "I want them to learn what you taught me," he said, his eyes free of bitterness. Responsibility and gratitude. He called me brother, like a true older sibling. And for the first time, I felt we were no longer strangers. Liam was no longer the arrogant boy. He had become part of Bennett's Diner, part of the family. Together, we upheld Grandpa's philosophy. Success isn't in the money you earn, but in the people you help. Every branch of Bennett's Diner was a testament to that, from free meals to the smiles of customers. Beneath the old photo of my grandparents hanging in the diner, I often told new staff, "Every plate we serve is a way to carry on their love." They nodded, and I knew their legacy lived not only in me, but in everyone who walked through the diner's doors. Bennett's Diner was more than a restaurant. It was a living legacy, a symbol of filial piety, forgiveness, and the strength of family. My story carries a message. Kindness can heal, forgiveness can renew, and a true legacy lies not in wealth but in the hearts of those who cherish one another. One evening, as the sunset bathed Cedar Ridge in gold, I stood outside the diner watching the warm light spill from the windows. I thought of Grandpa, Grandma Eleanor, and the painful years gone by. "Don't let the past define you," I told myself like a final piece of advice. "Let the way you love and live kindly do that."